We are continuing this morning our brief series of lessons on the subject of joy. We started that the last Sunday of June. We'll have this lesson today. We'll have likely one more last week, and I suppose that'll be the end, maybe. Taking these lessons from the book of Philippians, I doubt that any of us can remember specifics about those lessons. But perhaps by now, all of us can remember one key point, that people who are members of the kingdom of Christ are supposed to be joyful and happy people. Even though this world is filled with all kinds of reasons why I might have the really good excuse not to be joyful and not to be happy, we know by now that kingdom people are supposed to shine with happiness and with joy. Now, I could ask how well you're doing with that, but I'll refrain from going there right now. Last week we saw the beginning of chapter 3. Paul was very direct. He says, brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. Be joyful in the Lord, he said. And now as you begin chapter 4, and this lesson and next week's lesson will come out of chapter 4, he's going to begin the same way. Now he'll have a few verses that we've talked about before, but he'll really begin the chapter's thought in verse 4. I want you to read verse 4 with me. This is out of the easy to read version. Always be filled with joy in the Lord. I will say it again, be filled with joy. Now, are all of us convinced that as kingdom people we're supposed to be really happy people? Well, I want to tell you about this lesson. It is incredibly simple. It is incredibly redundant. And it is incredibly important. It's really, really simple. Burke is reminding me, all my lessons are just reminders. He said, when we get up and talk, we're just reminding people of how life is supposed to be in the kingdom. It's really simple. It's redundant. We've heard it over and over again, but it is so very important. And it's going to center around three words. The three words are these: gentle, worry, and thinking. Now, have you considered those before? Heard lessons on those before? And you may be wondering about that first word, gentle. What in the world could gentle have to do with being happy? Because Paul has said, as kingdom people, I want you to be rejoicing. I don't want you to be downtrodden in face. I don't want you to be negative in attitude. I want you to shine like a light, and it's going to shine through your joy. What in the world does gentleness have to do with happiness? The very next verse, verse 5, right after he says rejoice, and again I say rejoice, look at what verse 5 says. Let everyone see that you are gentle and kind. The Lord is coming soon. Or the New International Version would say, let your gentleness be known to all men, for the Lord is coming. What? Is Paul just writing out random thoughts? Is it just one thought and another thought? If this is inspiration from God, it seems to me it ought to fit together. What does gentleness have to do with happiness? Maybe you can remember that we said there seems to be an underlying, undergirding current going on in the book of Philippians, in that church at Philippi. And that is that there is bickering and there is quarreling over things that probably are not important at all. And where there is any bickering or quarreling, we all know, don't we, that there is no happiness, there is no joy. If you are bickering and you are quarreling with your spouse or with your child or with your brother or with a neighbor, there is no joy. It's impossible. So I want you to think about the last time that you were in that situation where you were bickering and you were quarreling. Perhaps it was with your spouse. Perhaps it was with your parents. Perhaps it was with somebody else. You said something, and they responded. And you responded back, and they responded. And every time this exchange takes place, every time the response takes place, it gets a little more intense. And it kind of escalates. Does it sound familiar? And before long, it's at a level where no one is happy. Everyone is upset. So I even was thinking about this before I had lunch with a man on Tuesday. He just confirmed what I was thinking. I thought, the next time this happens to me, what if I just don't say anything and I just smile? The next time someone begins to try to start bickering, I just smile. So I had lunch with a man Tuesday. Very nice restaurant. He's a very successful businessman and a partner in a big accounting firm. And he was in his mid-60s, and he's tall and straight, and he's so happy. And he and his wife had a child late in life. He had a 14-year-old son. He said, my wife has been gone. I've got to tell you the story. My wife has been gone. First time I'd ever met the man. My wife is gone with some of her family to another state for a funeral. My son and I were together. On Friday, I decided we would go to our lake house. That was the plan. And I was going to get up and be fishing by dawn on Saturday morning. And our 14-year-old son's been really, really busy. And we were getting ready to go to the lake house, and our 14-year-old son said, Dad, I really don't want to go to the lake house. He said, I looked at him and said, all right, then you shouldn't have to go. You just stay here. I'll go. He said, I'm driving to the lake house, and my wife calls. And she said, I assume y'all are on your way to the lake house to fish. He said, well, I'm on my way to the lake house. He's not. Well, where is he? He's at home. You mean you left him at home by himself? Don't you think you should have talked to me about this? What were you thinking? Don't you think we should have at least had a conversation? He said, all the while I'm driving, I never say a word. I'm just smiling to myself. I'm never saying a word. Finally, she stopped and she said, I guess we are having a conversation, aren't we? And he said, yes. And he said, we both busted out laughing. Now, he said later that night, about 9:30, I was going to go to bed really early because I was going to be on the lake by dawn fishing. He said, my son sent a text. He said, Dad, I hope your night is going better than mine. He thought, oh, no. Now we'll be in trouble. So he said, I grabbed my phone, I called my son, I said, what is going on? And he said, did you not see my second text? He said, no, I didn't see, I just called. He said, let me put you on speakerphone. He put him on speakerphone. So I looked at the second text, and he showed me the second text. It was a giant bowl of ice cream, 2 times larger than it should have been, with 2 bananas sticking out of it. It looked like a Vikings helmet. And he said, Dad, I'm having a great night. What happens the next time? The next time someone starts the bickering and they start the quarreling, if you just sit there and you don't say a word and you just smile. And it's going to happen. I wish it were appropriate, and it might even be. There is a Christian comedian named Tim Hawkins. And he has these little short things on YouTube you ought to watch. He's got one called My Helper, or My Little Helper. He's talking about when he's driving the car and his wife is next to him, you know how fast you're going? Do you know the speed limit? Do you see that stop sign? Do you know the lights turn green? And he makes something out of all this. We're driving along. I had to go to Lubbock on Thursday for a funeral, and we're driving along, and I like to wear a long-sleeve shirt in the summertime with it rolled up to about right here. I'm driving, and Suze reaches over and begins to unroll my sleeve and roll it back up. And I said, "What are you doing?" "I'm fixing your sleeve. Will it look better?" I said, "I liked how my sleeve looked. I roll them up every day just like this." I said, "Suze, do you remember that little video called My Little Helper? You've gone beyond driving." And we both did what? We both laughed. Where I could have easily taken it and said, "Suze, will you please mind your own business?" I could have taken it a different direction so easily. I told you it was incredibly simple, okay? But there is something about knowing when not to quarrel. Or maybe knowing how to never quarrel. By being gentle. And when they start it, you just smile. And you just be quiet. Because if you've ever tried to argue with someone who won't argue, it's just frustrating. It's just frustrating. You're not going to get very far. So the next word, and none of us want to talk about the next word. Have you done that this week? Have you worried this week? And just like with bickering, when you are worried about something, you cannot be happy. The worry and the happiness cannot coexist. They just can't. And I will promise you that every given week, and maybe every single day, brings to the table, brings to my life something to worry about. Always something to be concerned about. And maybe it's a little tiny thing. I mean, I get a call Wednesday night. I'm going to leave Thursday to go to a funeral. I get a call, and the person said, you might ought to have a meeting with these people this week, and you might ought to deal with this. And I start thinking, how did I say that last time? What kind of mess did I make last time? And I started worrying about it. And it kind of messed up my sleep. Does that sound familiar to you? And now here comes this verse, and we've read this verse so many times, but let's read it again. All you Christians, don't worry about anything. Does that work for you? Because he says it, does that work for you? But pray and ask God for everything you need, always giving thanks. Thanks for what you have. And because you belong to Christ Jesus, God's peace will stand guard over your thoughts and your feelings. His peace can do this far better than our human minds. I can't think myself out of worry. Do you see that? I can't do it. But there's a way for God's peace to come over me, and I say, well, that all sounds good, and I've heard it for umpteen years, and I've tried it umpteen times, and it hasn't worked. Do you have the same story going on in your life? I know you have. I know you've got the same story, but I wonder if I've been doing it wrongly. Because normally I spend a good share of time worrying about it, and then I'll look to God and say, will you take care of this? And I go back to my worrying. And I'm just wondering if we shouldn't be developing habits or disciplines around the idea of gentleness and this idea right here, as well as a third word we'll talk about. Now, what I mean by that is this. Habits are routines that come naturally. And bad habits, I don't know where they come from. I just don't know where they come from. But they get here so easily. And they come so quickly. And I find myself with bad habits over and over and over again. But the good habits and the good disciplines in life, they're so much harder. It's something I have to decide that I will focus on and stay with and do it over and over again. And I thought this week, well, what if as soon as I begin to contact something that I know is going to concern me and make me worry, what if right then I go to God and I say, God, this is going to worry me. I don't want to worry about it. I want you to take care of it. I want your peace to come over me. And I start doing that over and over and over again for years, which I haven't done. I wonder if it might take hold. Some of you know that I have been studying, reading, attending seminars on the subject of leadership and teaching on it for more than 30 years. And you've heard me say that I have 60 or 70 principles. I teach a President's Leadership class. It'll begin in early September. Everyone gets a booklet of just random principles. I teach a principle every month we meet, I teach a principle on leadership. But there are a core set of those principles that are so much a part of me, that I have used so often, that I speak so frequently. I say they're a part of my DNA. People hear them all the time. They see me practice them all the time. They're just absolutely natural with me because I've made them that way. By use, upon top of use, upon top of use. So they are literally leadership habits that I never violate. That I always find myself telling other people about. What if that became a habit? Where immediately, and even if it doesn't work this time, I do it again, and I do it again, I do it again, until it's such a natural response. I immediately go to God and say, I don't want to worry about this. I don't want to lose sleep over this. I don't want to be unhappy over this. Please deal with it and let your peace cover me. What if that became a way of life? Do you think I might eventually change? Well, think about the third word in that same way. Think about this word, thinking. Did I tell you this was incredibly simple? Did I tell you this lesson was incredibly redundant? How you think determines how you talk. How you think determines how you act. How you think determines your choices. How you think. Isn't it interesting in Romans chapter 12 and verse 1 when Paul is saying, don't be like the world, but be transformed into the likeness of Jesus? He says you do that by doing what? Renewing your what? Your mind, the way you think. You got to change the way you think. So read the verse that you've read so many times. Brothers and sisters, continue to think about what's good and what's worthy of praise. And think about what's true and honorable and right and pure and beautiful and respected. Oh, there is so much bad to think about. Have you noticed that? There's so much bad to think about. Susan and I have a habit. In the nights we're in Cordell, the habit almost always is, we go out and we drive around. We drive around the town. It's not that I haven't seen the town before. I've seen the town as long as I can remember. I mean, Janet ran me off in the first grade at Dale City, and so I came here to Cordell. Since the first grade, I've been running around town in Cordell. But Susan and I were gone for 40 years. And now we come back, and we drive around town. It's not the same. And I can see things that, I can see houses that are vacant. And I can see yards that are grown up. And I can see vacant business buildings and vacant things downtown. And I just keep seeing all this. And it's so easy for me to begin to think about, well, this doesn't look right. I don't like what I'm seeing. And then I think about the businesses in town and how few there are left and how the city is helpless. I mean, Greg's on the city council, but I can tell you, I don't have to know his business. He doesn't tell me the business. I just know he's helpless because there's not enough sales tax revenue to change anything very much. And remember my old leadership principle, what you focus on grows? What you keep thinking about gets bigger and bigger. And if we drive around town and we think about that all the time, and all the time I think, what in the world am I going to do here? And then we go back home, that little tiny place. And I look at the big tree, and I look at how I don't have any neighbors, and I can see the creek, and I think, I like this spot. It's got everything we need. And once in a while we talk about let's go somewhere else in Cordell and find a place, or let's go somewhere else beyond Cordell and find a place. And we end up saying, well, we like the little place. We like the little place. You might not like it. You might not want to live there, but we like it. And if I focus on that, if I keep coming back to saying, I like this, I focus on this, because I'm telling you what you focus on, what you think about is going to determine how you project yourself in life, your perspective in life, everything it's going to show in your face, by the way. It's going to show in your face. And so I have to force myself to quit thinking about the mess. I'm reading a book right now. I'm not going to tell you what the book's about, but it's written by a guy who's really a well-known name. It's been a well-known name in the Church of Christ for a long time. He's truly maybe the greatest theologian we've ever produced in our fellowship. But as he's writing the book, he's talking about how we may not be pleased with the direction of our country. We may not like some of the current laws. And he's talking about how blessed we've been to be in this existence. But he said, God's people have always been put in an environment, or frequently been put in an environment which they did not like. It wasn't pleasing. Think about 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Think about Daniel being in Babylon. Think about Joseph, even when he was ruler, being in Egypt. And he said, but God's people know how to be God's people in the midst of all of this. And they keep being God's people. And I thought, oh my. That's kind of what I'm talking about this morning. Because I have all kinds of reasons not to be gentle at times. I have all kinds of reasons to worry. I have all kinds of reasons to think on a negative look at things. And it's never going to change. You want it to change? Go to Mars. Not going to change here. The world's always going to be messed up around you. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. But as kingdom people, we be gentle people. We be people who are taking things to God just over and over and over again. And we try to change what we focus on or what we think about. Now, let me transition just for a second. Jesus came from heaven. He was God. He became flesh to die on a cross. We always say to take away our sins, and that's the absolute truth. It's the number one reason. But in the process, he wanted to purchase for himself a people who would exist in a world that didn't fit them because they now had become his people. But they would exist in a world that didn't fit them for his glory. Because what he wanted to do was save them. What he wanted to do was take them from this world to the next world so they have this paradise. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? And he wanted the people here, even in hardship, to be joyful, to shine like lights so that people could see it. And when you step over to the next world, you don't have any choice. It's absolute perfection. There's never going to be a frown on your face. He did all that for us. But I'm telling you, he paid a mighty high price to give me this kind of life and the kind of life to come. And so when I talk about being gentle, that's the way of Jesus. He didn't argue. You can almost see Jesus looking at people and smiling, can't you, when they confronted him. When you talk about worry, he didn't worry. He took it to God in prayer. And Jesus seemed to always have the right perspective on things. And he looks at us and says, why don't you do the same thing? And why don't you come home to live with me in heaven? I've made it possible by dying for you. How do we get any better than this, folks? So think about happiness given to us by Jesus and all the other things given to us by Jesus as we take this Lord's Supper. Yes, think about his death and think about the cruelty of that cross, but think about what he's given to us freely.